It's Thriller Week on Siskel and Ebert in the movies, and we've got 3 new ones.
Sound a little excited, James.
Sound less excited, Roger.
What the Flick, everybody. Matt Atchity, Alonso, Duralde, Ben Mankiewicz. Life Itself, the Roger Ebert documentary with Roger, made in the last months of his life. Is it full release now?
It is opening theatrically on July 4th, and I believe also available on demand from Magnolia. Yeah, it is directed by Steve James, the guy who did Hoop Dreams, which Roger Ebert was a big champion of, and was the perfect choice to make a film based on the Roger's autobiography of the same name. It's executive produced by Martin Scorsese, and it is about Ebert's life as a writer, as a film critic, and as someone who, you know, when he had personal health setbacks, discovered blogging and found a whole new voice. Check it out.
Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel were the most powerful critics of all time.
The perfect matching of opposites.
Even though Roger wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, Gene lived the life.
These were towering figures clashing. It was, I'm going to crush you.
You give Benji the Hunter a positive review.
That's totally unfair because you realize
they almost didn't care what anyone else thought as long as they could try to persuade the other.
This morning I confessed that I am a sick person. 3 years ago, I felt a lump under my chin, and it turned out to be cancer.
Roger had an inner core made of steel.
You want to rest a little bit or work a little bit?
Ask Steve, he's the director.
He is a soldier of cinema who cannot even speak anymore, and he plows on, and that touches my heart very deeply.
For me, the movies are like a machine that generates empathy. It lets you understand hopes, aspirations, dreams, and fears. It helps us to identify with the people who are sharing this journey with us.
This is one of the few movies in our lifetime that's going to be really difficult, that film critics, in a way, are the last people who should be reviewing it.
That's true.
You know, like,
I mean, let's talk about, Christie's not here. She's recused herself because she worked closely with both Roger and Chaz.
Yeah.
Right, who's also,
and she's
Chaz
writing
also
for
an
that site.
executive
But,
producer,
yeah, but she worked very closely with them, so she knows she can't look at this objectively.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a film critic alive right now, I would say, that isn't going into this movie with some opinion about Roger Ebert. Some might not like him. A lot of us, you know, revere him, and you know, he was really influential in our lives. It's kind of like, you know, when they find a prostitute to have her review Working Girl, or not a Pretty Woman, you know, from that point of view. But yeah, like there's nothing but film critics talking about this movie.
So I would watch that.
You know, they get the expert witness, like bring in a welder to talk about Flashdance, that kind of thing.
By the way, like once a month, let's bring in a whore to review movies. That'd be great.
You mean other than you?
There we go.
So, you know, so it's hard to talk about this movie even remotely objectively, not that critics are ever objective anyway, but it's, you know, James is a really good documentarian, and I learned a lot about Ebert's life, you know, his working class upbringing, his, you know, getting a job at the Tribune. Is Tribune or the Sun-Times?
Sun-Times.
Sorry.
Please, the Sun-Times.
So the Sun-Times, yes, right. So the Tribune is the schmancy paper, and the Sun-Times was the prole paper, apparently, in Chicago. You know, his relationship with Chaz. She talks about things in this documentary that she's never talked about publicly before. There were a couple of things I might have liked some more insight on, as with any doc. You know, they don't talk about his time in South Africa at all, which he mentions a lot in his writing, and I think was an influential moment in his life when he studied there for a while during the apartheid era.
But we do get a lot of when he was running the school newspaper, which was really run like at the Daily Illini. Yeah, at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and he, you know, and being there at this incredibly seminal time of right in the middle of the Civil Rights Movement and the murder of the 4 girls in Birmingham, and then the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and there were some great. Like, I didn't know that stuff. I mean, I didn't know.
The writings that he does in reaction to those 4 girls, and then the decisions that he makes about the layout of the paper when Kennedy dies.
That's good stuff.
Right. It's good. It's great stuff, and it shows really his background and what went into making him a great newspaper man. One of the things I thought was interesting about this movie is it really starts out being kind of about his. I mean, clearly, like they're going through his life, and the movie kind of pivots as Ebert himself gets sicker and sicker as the movie's being made. But James doesn't lose sight of what's happening and what the movie's supposed to be about, and he puts a lot of the coverage of Ebert's illness in the context of his relationship with Gene Siskel. And I thought that was interesting because the thing that was, they go into this in the movie, the shocking thing was Siskel had kept his illness really quiet.
Right.
And that really affected Roger, right? It came as a surprise and it really hurt him. And the movie goes into talking about he made the decision to be so forthcoming because of how he felt about what happened with Siskel.
Some of the stuff that I learned about Siskel in this movie is the most interesting
The biggest bombshell of the movie is about Gene Siskel.
Hanging out with Hugh Hefner.
Right.
For like a year.
Yeah.
On the plane.
In the grotto with topless ladies, Gene Siskel. It was crazy. That was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things.
There's a great shot of Siskel and some other guy. I don't think it was Hefner.
No.
There's a topless
in a
woman.
Waterfall.
In a waterfall.
Right, they're just like...
Yeah, it was classic my eyes are up here, fellas. Kind of.
What was revealing mostly about that, and to me, was that my image of Gene Siskel is not that at all.
No.
But there was Siskel's wife was just a tremendous interview subject.
Yeah,
I mean, she added so much to that movie and was so honest about what was wrong with Roger and what was right with Roger, which makes when she talks about what's right with Roger gives
matter
so much more. Yeah.
And actually, it's an interesting parallel when you think about it, because you've got Siskel's Hefner period and you've got Ebert's Russ Meyer period.
Right,
so,
totally. That's the guy. I just thought there should be. That was the best part of the documentary to me, was the Siskel stuff. And I understand that this was about Roger, but so much of who Roger is and he even would acknowledge this was what happened on that show, and that really peculiar relationship with Siskel.
You could do a really there's a very interesting documentary and a very interesting history to be done about the progression of their relationship and what it meant, not just for those two men as writers and people, but what it meant for media
the culture.
And culture in general. I think that would be fascinating. And one of my, I think we're kind of all dancing around this. I think the things that's a little bit of a disappointment is you get a hint of that in this. It's like, oh God, that's what I really want to see.
Right, totally.
That's what's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was all interesting, and it's hard not to be dramatic with what happened to Roger and just with the way he looks, and so you want to call it courage for talking about it, and I suppose you want to talk about it because
he's right there on camera. I mean, there's so much footage of Roger Ebert on camera with no lower jaw, and you just got to look at it.
And one of the things that was surprising about this movie for me was that, first of all, it's unflinching like that right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Right? There's no leading up to it. It's right that, and I think even those pictures that were in Esquire don't really give you a sense of what he was dealing with. It's not just his jaw was gone, like everything, like his neck's gone, right? You're seeing, there's shots where you can see through his mouth to the bandages on his neck, and I think, I'm not sure a lot of people have a sense of kind of what he was going through.
No, and I saw him so regularly there in 2008 to 2009 when I was doing the show. And I mean, obviously, and his condition deteriorated immensely then before he died, because it wasn't like that. I had that weird, I wasn't close to him, but he was very, very kind to me, and I don't want to overstate the friendship we had at all, but he was very nice to me and sent me emails, and I think he understood that the enormous difficulty of doing that job, of which, as we all know now, that was a failure, and it was a public failure, and that was the biggest public failure of my life. I hope there isn't another one.
Today.
Right, exactly. Right. July 3rd.
Jury's still out on this show.
2014. Less public.
This is a private failure.
But he was very kind about it, and ultimately, and I wrote about it when he died, because you realize he's just a giant man, even diminished. He was a giant, and it's a failure I can live with. It doesn't pain me. It was embarrassing for a time, but it doesn't pain me to have failed to.
It's kind of like
to succeed Roger Ebert.
Yeah. Oh, I struck out after Babe Ruth hit a home run.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And I think what the movie does so well is to really kind of capture that but yeah, I mean, obviously Siskel and Ebert and their sort of prickly chemistry, and there really hadn't been anything like that on TV before, was part of what made them so successful. But they also talk about how Roger was always such a champion of little films. You know, he reviewed Martin Scorsese's very first movie in the late 60s out of a film festival and said, this is a guy to keep an eye out on. You know, all the way up,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's what the title became.
Right. All the way up to the end, where you've got filmmakers like Ava DuVernay talking about how Roger, you know, championed their early films.
That was a very powerful moment.
And then, and then she has this amazing story about, you know, having met him at the Oscars when she was a little girl, and you know, so you know, it really captures his love of film, his love of what he does. You know, even when he is at his sickest, and you know, when he gets to go back at work, he says, seeing movies and writing about them, that's the best thing. That's when I'm in the zone. That's what takes me out of all this. So you know, it's an inspirational film, I think. I mean, yeah, it's not perfect, and those of us who knew Roger a little or a lot, or even just really admired him, there's stuff that we'll want to know more about, and I guess we should all go read his book. I still haven't done that, but you know, it's I was impressed with what they were able to do.
I was very moved by it a number of times, so I think I may have liked it a little better than you guys, but I know everybody liked it. But it was moving. There were some really touching moments in it, and I thought that Chaz was basically a very honest character. There's a scene there at the end of that maybe there should have been a little more of that even two people who love each other and as committed as she was to helping him and as patient and understanding as he was being a patient, there are moments, you know, where the frustration boils over, as I'm sure it does in many, and that was difficult to watch, but very important to watch. So
and Ebert, as a fan of Steve James, even at one point in the film, is saying, you know, I think Chaz is not wanting to divulge certain information, and he's like, no, this is your movie. You have to tell this story the way that you need to tell it. And so it was great that even though he's the subject, he still cared enough about the filmmaker to respect his process.
They had a ridiculously big wedding. Like that was
big ass wedding.
They had a big ass wedding. I was moved by it. I think it's worth seeing. I think people will be interested. You'll love the Siskel. One very quick thing about the nature of television now and the nature of this business now, as opposed to 40 years ago when they started. 38. I think they started in 76.
75, I think.
Yeah, doing so we're right at coming up on 40. Like they sucked. Like you forget that. Like, you know, when they tried it with me and Ben Lyons, and then you know, and then there was the Christie show. What was her partner? Ignotti. And Christie Ignotti, and of course, and Michael and Tony Scott, and there would be, you know, like, oh, you got to get 5 try, and I, in those times that I'd sit there and they'd try and make this chemistry happen between me and Ben, and they'd be like, no, and then you realize those guys had like 7 years on public television to blow, right, to sort of develop their hatred and their anger. And don't get me wrong, they were both gifted writers, gifted storytellers, and it was perfect. But they burned off like 300 shows before they found the magic.
Didn't come out of Zeus's head, like camera ready.
Exactly.
And they'd both been reviewing for years.
That's right.
They both knew film backwards and forwards. Roger had already won the Pulitzer. You know, you see the clip of Roger on TV by himself, and it's awful.
Oh yeah.
Right, and everybody admits, like, oh yeah, it's bad. And he's, you know, it makes me think like, I liked it so much, I bought the company. Like, you know, you like, God, how did this guy keep getting on there?
Their obsession with each other was really great. I mean, that's almost like I want an hour just on that, as you said. Like I want a ESPN 30/30 on that somehow, which they might be able to get away with, because, you know, Gene's paranoia that Roger would leave, because Roger just pissed off at Gene all the time, right, and thinks that Gene's not up to it and not as smart, and you know, and he's such a dick to him in the promos. Roger is a huge dick in the promos, but Gene like actually knew. He's like, this guy is big enough. He'll ruin everything if we're not careful. And then when they get the syndication deal, oh, there's too much money here. He can't walk away. Gene's enormous relief, and then they start getting along better.
Well, and you know, there's the interesting thing where you see later in his career, like there's the clips from the Cannes special, right? And we all know that later in his career, yeah, you know what? Roger probably could have held a show by himself, but at that point, like, Gene still brought out enough of like a spark in them, you know, that rivalry. And yeah, there was definitely affection towards the end, and they ended up, you know, as the movie says, they ended up becoming friends. But boy, those guys had different opinions, and neither of them were going to back down, neither of them were interested at all and saying, "Oh yeah, you have a good point. Maybe you swayed me."
And look, and giving credit to Richard Roeper, I mean, what the two of them had together was so singular and unique and unduplicatable.
Right.
You know, that it was special. It was magic.
It was special, and that was the only thing that. But that said, odd that Roeper wasn't in it. I mean, I'm sure they.
Yeah,
there's
curious. I wonder
some sort of tactical reason for that. I don't, you know.
It's not even mentioned. Like there's no clips of their show or anything.
Yeah, and I think they did 7 years, something like that together before Roger got sick. Anyway, so I give it an 8.8. I found it quite moving. I wanted more of the middle part about Siskel, but
yeah, no, I give it an 8. If you love movies, if you love movie critics, bless your heart.
Yeah,
you should see it.
I agree. I give it an 8. Right there with you.
So that's 8.3 for us, and there's
currently 98% on the tomato meter.
Every critic has liked it but one, and even the one who didn't like it didn't dislike it that much. Yeah. All right, thanks guys.